This is the IBJ podcast for the week of October the 5th, 2020, brought to you by the law firm Krieg DeVault. I'm Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. As we've discussed several times in the last 6 months, the economy that we've built over the last 40 years in Indianapolis has been exposed as particularly vulnerable to a pandemic. The pillars of commerce in Indianapolis, and particularly downtown, include conventions, tourism, and sports, sometimes all three of them combined in some fashion. These sectors depend on bringing lots of people together, sometimes in very tight spaces, and that obviously isn't working right now. As we dig ourselves out of this and plan for the rebound, Nate Feltman wants us to think much, much bigger than simply getting back to normal. He had noticed, even before the pandemic, a kind of stagnation in Indianapolis, a city that prides itself on taking risks and bringing people together to make big, bold, and sometimes seemingly impossible ideas a reality. Nate believes we need new aggressive goals, dreams that can inspire and bring together the next generation of city leaders. So who's Nate Feltman? Well, if you're not already familiar with Nate, he's my boss. He's the CEO and a co-owner of IBJ Media, which includes the flagship publication, Indianapolis Business Journal. Nate has a fascinating resume. He's a former Indiana Secretary of Commerce. He's an attorney whose specialties have included mergers and acquisitions and cross-border transactions, a career that took him to Moscow for 4 years to work with international law firms. He's the former president and co-owner of Home Health Depot, which was acquired in 2017. Later that year, he became an investor in IBJ Media. So Nate's been around and he knows his stuff, and he's our guest this week on the podcast. So we can dig deeper, not only into the need for reviving Indianapolis, but to answer the wake-up call for unifying the city behind a big initiative that can keep the city competitive. And along the way, we also talk about IBJ and how it's been faring during the pandemic. Here's our conversation. I'm very pleased to welcome to the IBJ podcast virtual studio, Nate Feltman, CEO and co-owner of IBJ Media. Nate, thank you for making time today.
Good to be with you as always, Mason. Thank you.
So in your column in the September 25th issue of IBJ, you identify what you're hearing as an alarm about the future of Indianapolis. And you say that you're hearing this through conversations that you're having with a wide range of people. First off, who are these people? Not necessarily their identities, but who are they? What do they do?
These people come from all walks of life. So they come from small business owners here in Indianapolis. It also comes from larger business CEOs. I'm hearing from surrounding counties, basically the mayors in those counties who are concerned about being, as they term it, not me, but they term it a suburb of nothing. It's concerned citizens, people who are workers both in Marion County and work in the surrounding counties as well. So it's a wide swath, I'd say, of the community that I hear from often.
And what do they mean by suburb of nothing? What is the common concern that you're hearing?
So there are two issues. One issue is the current crisis, right? I think it's important to separate them into two issues. The first issue is the immediate concern that nobody's downtown or close to nobody, and the safety of going downtown, what's going to happen and is happening to the businesses that are located downtown that serve, as we recently wrote about, 200,000 or so people a day that are working or participating in downtown activities. And so that's the first immediate concern.
Well, and that's the number of people that we typically would have,
right,
prior to the pandemic.
Correct.
I think that they were saying it's now closer to maybe like 50,000.
50,000, right. So there's that concern. But the actual bigger concern is a more long-term concern. And it was a conversation that I'm referring to, or conversations that actually occurred prior to this year. And in early this year, before we ran into the pandemic and before we ran into the social unrest, these conversations had already been taking place, were taking place about what is next for Indianapolis. And it's interesting in that, given what we've been through this year, some of the concerns about what is the vision for Indianapolis in the future have been highlighted, and as I wrote about, been exposed. And that's the reliance on sports and convention business. And in many cases, we have a heavier reliance here in Indianapolis as compared to some peer cities. So I think it's important to divide them into two issues, both the short term of what's happening downtown, and for me, the bigger concern about where is Indianapolis going, what comes next. We've had great success with the strategy over the last 4 or 5 decades, but what's the strategy going forward?
Should we not feel confident that once we get a vaccine and everybody's inoculated, that problem will just go away?
Some of that probably will go away, but the fact of, where does Indianapolis now go? The fact that we have a changing economy from 40, 50 years ago, the fact that we have changing tastes from our young people about what they want and what is attractive to them in terms of where they're going to live and where they're going to work. And so that's the piece where, yes, I'm confident that Indianapolis will get back to a fully functioning downtown in many respects. Maybe we'll have some concerns about empty buildings as a result of, the virtual working aspect that we all have seen come to fruition. But it's really where do we go from here? What's the next big aspirational goal for the city of Indianapolis? And that's an area to spend some time, Mason, because I think it's really important here to separate the fact that city leaders got together 40, 50 years ago and decided to bet on a sports strategy versus what I really think happened, and I've talked to a lot of these folks, that really wasn't the beginning. The beginning was concern about where are we going to go as a city? And aspirationally, what does that mean? We want to be a growing city. We want to be a city that attracts families. We want to be a city that sees incomes going in a positive direction. We want people living downtown. We want activity downtown, whether it's sporting events or other activities. We want museums downtown. We want to be a world-class city. It was the vision that came first. Then the sports strategy was how you got there. And so often I don't hear that piece talked about, which is what is our vision for the future? Where do we go and who do we begin to make part of this conversation about who we want to be, call it 2.0 Indianapolis after the sports strategy and the vision. I think that strategy has been incredibly successful. Today we are hosting Final Four championships more than most cities, right? We are hosting Big Ten football championships. We're attracting the Super Bowl. We attracted the All-Star game. And that's fantastic. And that has helped us become a great city and attracted people to live downtown. But is that going to be enough to move us into the next stage and keep up with peer cities that we often like to compare ourselves to, whether it's Denver, Nashville, Columbus, Ohio, the list goes on? I'm not so sure. And I don't think a lot of people are so sure that that's going to be enough to sustain us. I think there are changing economic, changing cultural circumstances in terms of how people are and where people are choosing to live.
Yeah. So in a sense, diversifying the things that we hang our hat on would be helpful. I'm glad you brought that up because I've been feeling that since the Super Bowl in 2012, that there really hasn't been a common vision that has animated the city to that magnitude.
Yes.
The same way. And that we've become very good at hosting, singular events, but not so great at planning long-term.
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing to think about because I think we've become a little bit accustomed to waiting around for perhaps politicians to come up with ideas. And the more I've thought about this, and more people I talk to, I'm not sure that that's the right strategy. And I'm not sure that's actually what happened 40, 50 years ago when our city forefathers came up with the vision and strategy. I'm not sure they went and said, Mayor Hudnut or Mayor Lugar, what do you think we should do? Now, those folks had great ideas and they made big bets. And we're the beneficiaries. But I do believe, and I think I do know what happened, which was a lot of people, and this is pretty interesting. Think about who our city forefathers are, some of the names in terms of the sports strategy I'm referencing in the vision. There are people like Jim Morris. There are people like Ted Bohm, Mark Miles, Mitch Daniels. Think about now how old those people were in 1970 and 1980. These folks, list goes on, these folks were in their 20s and 30s, right? Now, what's important is they got together and then they had the support of others that were the powerful, the CEOs of our city, of certain companies like Lilly, like One America before AUL, and the Lilly Endowment. But they were the ones who helped come up with the vision, and then they got the others to buy in. And I believe in many cases, the politicians followed. that could be a key and a signal to what we need to do for our future.
In the discussions that you've had, have people pointed the way towards any specific visions or industries, things that they feel like we should be focusing on now?
So it's interesting. In some cases, yes, but in many cases, the feeling is we need to take a look at what are the trends that are occurring in our economy today, and not think about today, but think about where things could go in the future. So we've often written about at the IBJ, of course, about the downtown mall. And that's a big chunk of downtown. And I think everybody is coming to the conclusion that big malls, especially sitting in the center of your downtown, are likely not the future. And so there's an important opportunity there to rethink that space and rethink it, whether that's mixed use, whether it's partly a park, whether it's some other type of attraction. That's an opportunity to totally rethink a big part of downtown. Then there are people who have pointed out how important IUPUI and the future of that campus can be, and how much hundreds of millions of dollars are coming into that campus on medical research, and looking around the country and seeing best practices for taking that research and turning it into potential new high growth companies. And so, more focus on that front, I think, could be really important in terms of new business startups. I think when you think about what are the important drivers, there's a lot of agreement that you get good talent to come to your city, a lot of good things are going to happen. And, we have attracted a lot of talent with companies like Salesforce and like in Interactive Intelligence, now Genesis. Those have been talent attractors and, frankly, talent retention opportunities from our great universities. So thinking about, what are the opportunities for more new business startups and seeing opportunities to attract young people, retain young people to our core in our city, I think is a big part of the strategy. I don't think anybody has all the answers, but if we get a great group of young, talented people like they did back in the 70s, 80s, coming together and really brainstorming and thinking about what can be, should be the drivers, some people are going to argue placemaking is everything. So rethinking what our center, our core looks like, feels like. There are those out there, economists, who argue, I think Richard Florida is one of them, who argue placemaking is everything for attracting talent. And so that's something that we need to probably pay some attention to. And others will argue it's things like a world-class performing arts center, for example. And we've got some places downtown, but do we have anything quite like what we see in Carmel? No, I don't think we do. But those are all the kind of things that we can begin to think about, and maybe things a lot bigger than that. I also say, Mason, that going back to the vision, we need to come up with some metrics that we are part of that vision, right? So is it population growth? Is it income growth? Is it new business startups? What are the metrics we care about? And then once you set that vision and you say, this is what makes a world-class city, then you can start coming up with the strategies to execute that vision.
Now, as you know, and we know the folks who cover Indianapolis, the city has no lack of leadership in specific industries. I mean, we have dedicated groups for supporting the technology industry. We have groups for supporting advanced manufacturing. We have groups for supporting biosciences. When we host a large event, we usually have a host committee. There's a ton of civic engagement with those kinds of things. We have organizations like the Greater Indianapolis Progress Committee. We have the Indy Chamber. We have Downtown Indy. We have a just created Indianapolis African American Quality of Life Renewal Initiative.
Yes.
There's a lot of civic engagement, and there are a lot of people who are focused on particular parts of these issues.
Right.
Is the problem that these efforts are too diffuse? Do they need to be organized at a higher level?
That's a great question. I would argue that we have created so many verticals in so many areas, all the ones you just mentioned, that we have a little bit of tunnel vision. And we have a lot of great civic leaders, from our top CEOs and our largest companies all the way down to our smaller companies and everything in between, the nonprofit leaders, et cetera. But we have become so specialized in all the different areas. Let's under CICP, you got TechPoint, and you got BioCrossroads, and you have Ascend, and you have Connexus, and the list goes on, right? What we don't have necessarily, Mason, that I think might be missing in the formula is a pure think tank like a Hudson Institute that all those people did at that think tank were to think about and dream up big ideas about where we could go, not just in this city, but this state. And the capacity that would create for dreaming up big ideas and thinking about what the bigger picture looks like, what's a bigger vision for our city, what's a bigger vision for our state, could be immensely helpful, that the others that you just mentioned could feed up into the actual vision and achieving the metrics. Some would argue that we've been so successful with our last strategy of 40, 50 years ago that sometimes that legacy gets a little bit in our way of thinking about the next big thing. That's a good thing in some ways, that we've been so successful, that group and the execution was done so well. But now there's a little bit of a lack of capacity to think about big ideas because we become so vertical, and we have all those volunteers focused on all those huge events that are coming in every year, multiple events, that we don't have the luxury and time in many cases to sit back and say, okay, this has been successful. What's going to drive the next 40 or 50 years?
So if I said, Nate, by the power invested in me, I am making you in charge of this thing, Project Big Bold Ideas, what needs to happen? What are you going to do first?
All right. Well, that's a great question. And the first thing is to do a little bit of homework in terms of the couple of things I just mentioned. So I've done a little bit of the homework already with talking to a lot of our forefathers, the people who were instrumental. And some of these thoughts that I just gave you emanate from the learning that took place in those conversations. My thought is that it's really critical that we get a lot of young people, a diverse group of young people, similar to what happened 40, 50 years ago, the 20s and 30s somethings coming together and thinking about, what do we want this city to be? You know, they chose Indianapolis for one reason or another, so they had some ideas of what attracted them here. Some of them were homegrown and others came to the city. But what do we want the city to be? So I think the first step is to begin to convene conversations with people who are willing to roll up their sleeves, work really hard. There's going to be some research needed. There's a piece that needs to happen, is the capacity building to be able to do this research, and asking our CEOs and our leaders of our organizations in this city, both for-profit and nonprofit, to give some of their young folks an opportunity to participate in these conversations, and then not only participate, but then back financially some of the research that may need to be done and capacity building they may need to happen in order to learn as much as we can and then come up with a strategy and implementation. Once you come up with the strategy, usually it requires dollars and investments and a willingness to place some bets. You know, our forefathers placed some pretty darn big bets. And they seemed a little risky at the time, but they paid off for us well. I'm referring to Hudnut and company building the Hoosier Dome, right, and going after the Colts. And that was a big bet, and there wasn't a certain payoff, but there was a probability that it was going to go in the right direction. But at the starting point is getting people energized. And I think we have a huge opportunity. I think this year's events have really been a catalyst for people to begin to think and see how strong of a place we had called Indianapolis and what the potential for it deteriorating is if we're not careful. So I think there's a catalytic opportunity right now to pull young people together and begin to form our vision and then our strategy. Okay, let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
The IBJ Podcast is brought to you by Krieg DeVault, a trusted and dynamic law firm representing a wide variety of local, regional, and national clients. Committed to each other and to every client, Krieg DeVault prides itself on integrity, professionalism, respect, and excellence. Financial institutions, global manufacturers, national healthcare providers, and successful organizations of all sizes and market focus rely on Krieg DeVault to create innovative and successful business solutions. Connect today at www.kriegdevault.com.
All right, we're back with this week's edition of the IBJ Podcast. I'm speaking with Nate Feltman, CEO and co-owner of IBJ Media, about the need for the city to coalesce around a new big idea. Is there a role that you think the IBJ could play in this?
I do. And I think it's a convening role. It's also, a community conversation. As you know, newspapers historically, going back to the founding of our country, have played such an important role in reporting and keeping our citizens informed of what's happening, and play a critical role in building a sense of community and being a member of that community. Information is crucial in what's happening. So I think the IBJ is playing a role right now through all of the work that we're doing, you're doing, and it needs to play a really critical role going forward to highlight some of the things that can happen in this city. And so, yes, I'm absolutely confident that we can play a role and that we are playing a role, but I think it can be an even stronger one.
So I want to go on an IBJ related tangent here. When you're talking to folks around the city, I'm going to assume that you get the same questions that I do when I'm interviewing them, which is, how is the IBJ doing? I mean, we're right smack in the middle of downtown. We're a small business, and we're going through some of the same pressures as everybody else in the pandemic. What should the public know about how we're doing?
Well, thanks for asking. And the good news is that we are doing well. We certainly have not been, we're not an exception to those that are going through difficult times. When our supporters and partners and on the advertising front, marketing front, go through difficult times, we are going to go along through that with them. But that being said, one amazing thing that's happened the last couple of years, as you know, Mason, is that our number of paid subscribers has really begun to grow. In the last 2 years, not even 2 years, a little less than 2 years, we've almost grown by 4,000 paid subscribers. And that's at a time when a lot of newspapers and media companies are having a difficult time growing their subscriber base. That's a testament, I know, and I hear it all the time, of what kind of quality that we're producing. It's also just a realization that local news, understanding of what's going on in the community, and hearing voices from different parts of the community, a diverse part of the community, is critical for people to stay informed and make decisions. So I'm really confident in our future. We're also seeing increased engagement with our website. Especially during difficult times, people are looking for information that they can trust. They're looking for information in terms of making their decisions of where they can go and not go. And the number of users at our website or people visiting our website has really gone through the roof. That's all good news. And the other good news is a lot of our partners have really stuck with us. As you know, we've taken a lot of our events virtually, like many have, and our partners in those events have really stuck with us. And that's a new opportunity by itself, going virtual with our events. We've learned a lot of things, right? Many aspects of what we've learned will carry over even when we can begin to do in-person events, which I know everyone is excited to do. It's also a big aspect of what's happening now is that we've become a lot more entrepreneurial, and meaning that we've all figured out how to work from home when we have to. Many of us come in the office, but many of us are still working from home for obvious reasons. We've learned how to be more nimble. We've introduced new products this year, as you know, including a new thought leadership series, a new email that's called the IBJ Virus Recovery Wrap-Up that comes out at the end of each day. So we extended our news coverage throughout the day with a 8 at 8, and then our midday daily update, and then the virus recovery report wrap-up at the end. So we're producing more information. I'm really excited about where we're going. I think we have an opportunity to really grow and be a bigger part of this community. And so I'd say we're doing quite well right now, Mason.
I know Congress, as we speak probably, is talking about extending stimulus into next year. And as we've reported, we received a payroll protection program loan, which I think they reported was in the range of, $350,000 to $1 million. What kind of situation would we be in were it not for that PPP loan program?
I'd say it'd be a much more challenging year, there's no doubt. I mean, the fact that when we've had a lot of our partners had their marketing dollars either eliminated or severely decreased, that's certainly been a big help this year. It's also why I'm making sure on the business front at the IBJ that we're planning for next year. Next year, all the companies I talk to are all a little worried about where the economy is going to go. We obviously have a contentious election that we're in the middle of. There are implications as a result of that in terms of our economy. The Fed, with all of its stimulus, at some point you would have to think is going to run out of ability to inject more cash. And so at some point, we're all wondering, are we going to hit a more difficult period? And so we're doing all we have to do on our end to be prepared for that. One of the great things about IBJ being locally owned and managed is that we can make decisions that make a lot of sense for us without having to answer to out-of-state leadership. And we do that. We're nimble, we're careful, and we really appreciate the support that our corporate community and non-for-profit community and all the organizations that we've worked with through the years have shown by continuing their strong partnerships with the IBJ. It's what sustains us, and they all know, and it's very much what I appreciate. They know and understand how important the news, the content that we produce is for them. There's nobody in the marketplace that's producing what we do, and it's a good place to be.
We really haven't talked in advance about how much we wanted to reveal about the IBJ. But let me ask you this, given what we know now, we're starting the fourth quarter. I assume you have an idea of how the year's going to go. Do we have a shot at breaking even or being profitable this year?
We do. It's only because of the last, of course, I've got shareholders, Mickey Maurer and Bob Schloss, and we collectively been working together to continue to grow and improve the company. And we'll be profitable this year. It's because of all the strong efforts that have taken place. And it's critical that we do remain profitable, obviously. So we're going to continue fighting hard. I knew when I decided to get involved with the media business that it wasn't for the faint of heart. And I also knew that in the previous business I was involved in, healthcare. It's also, as all the folks know that are involved in healthcare, is not for the faint of heart. But usually hard work and a vision and good ideas pay off. And that's what we're all doing at the IBJ, and working together to come up with ideas for the future and understanding and trying to figure out in a tough media market, how to provide content that is important and usable by our audiences that count on us every day. And that's the trick. And the good news is those that figure that out are going to survive. And I'm confident in IBJ's future in that regard. I
think everybody agrees that it would be a great thing for the downtown economy if more people whose jobs are based downtown would return to the office or return to their place of business. As a business owner, with a business that is right on the circle, how does your sense of responsibility to the well-being of the city factor into your decision about where your employees should be?
That's a difficult question, but a great question, because that also is on everybody's mind that cares about downtown. And it's a very difficult balance to strike. And so I think all CEOs understand and know that their employees, their colleagues that have small children, that may be living with older adults, or that they have health conditions that put their health in jeopardy if they were to get the virus. I think all CEOs understand and realize that in order to run a company, you've got to have compassion and empathy and understanding of what your colleagues are going through or potentially could go through. So that's the balance on one side. And the other side, as a downtown business owner and someone who cares about our city, and I know all of us do, you want to get people back. I think there is a happy medium. At the IBJ, we've had some employees who've been coming in throughout the entire last 6 months, ever since the March shutdowns have occurred. We, of course, as a media organization, are able to continue to work. We were included in the list of essential organizations. So we've had a number of people who've come in every single day. We've had some people who come in once or twice a week, and we have some who've made the decision right now is not the right time for them for health considerations. And I think that's okay. I do think, though, it's time, my opinion is, it's time for CEOs to begin to encourage their employees that are able and have the ability to work for whatever reason. They don't have the health concern, or they don't have children or older people that are coming into contact that could be more susceptible. That it's an opportunity now. We've learned a lot. We've learned about ways that we can protect ourselves. We're taking all those precautions at the IBJ. And I think I'm beginning to hear that more companies are beginning to encourage their employees to come back to work. One of the biggest reasons is not only their care for the city, obviously, which we all want the city to come back. We all do not want more business to close. But there's also something lacking that in terms of your interactions with colleagues and collaboration opportunities. I mean, I've been in the office all day today, for example, and I've had 6 or 7 just instances where I just stop by and I'm talking to somebody, and it's on something that would move our company forward that wouldn't have happened but for me being here in the office with our colleagues. So that is the piece that I think a lot of people are beginning to realize is missing when we're isolated and we're not in the same building. At the same time, I think we're all learning that we can work remotely effectively and efficiently in many cases. And there are some advantages to that. Maybe not for every job at every company, but some jobs, there are some opportunities there and even can gain in some productivity. So it's a balance that I think we're all trying to strike. But I would say that I'm encouraging and hoping that more people will begin to come back to work as we work our way through the crisis.
Going back to the big, bold ideas for a second.
Yeah.
Just you personally, you, Nate Feltman, where would you like to see the city head? I mean, I know right now, my family talks about almost nothing but public education. We would love to see some sort of major initiative to improve public education. That's in our best interest. What do you find yourself talking about?
Well, it's multifaceted, and that is one, and that leads directly to what I think is the biggest opportunity, and it's talent, all around talent. I mean, if we don't have a good public education system and other choices within the educational system, then you simply are not going to have the same talent opportunity. And it's clear to me that the big ideas and the opportunities and new business startups, all the things that we say we want our city to do well in, don't happen without the talent. And so it's homegrown talent, of course, that we've got to get better at educating and then retaining. And it's also I think placemaking is really key. And thinking critically about what kind of place people want to live and what kind of activities they're going to want to enjoy. And thinking about, rethinking parts of our downtown where that can happen. I don't necessarily see a silver bullet. We're not going to move the city to Texas and be warmer through the winter. I don't know that necessarily we're going to be Music City, but there are those aspects in our city, as you know. We have a music scene and we have a foodie scene for sure. And I think it's certainly multifaceted and focus on talent, a focus on public health, focus on startups and entrepreneurship. Those go a long, long way to driving our city forward.
Nate, thank you so much. Thanks for the deep thinking, and hopefully we'll be able to see some fruit from this here in the next few months.
Thank you so much, Mason.
My thanks again to Nate Feltman. You can read the column that we've been referring to at IBJ.com. If I were you, I would go to the little search magnifying glass at the top left of the homepage and type in the word Feltman, F-E-L-T-M-A-N. The column should be the first result you see. And please leave a comment about what you'd like to see from the Circle City over the next decade or so. And before you get on with the rest of your week, I want to draw your attention to some of the top stories in the latest issue of IBJ. First up, while much of Indiana's hospitality sector has struggled during the pandemic, another pillar of the state's economy has been able to remain on its feet. Designated as essential businesses, most manufacturers have been able to remain in operation throughout the pandemic. Susan Orr explains why some local companies say the industry already was in a good position to handle the crisis. Also in this week's issue, John Russell explores why the long-simmering dispute between Eli Lilly and Company and safety net hospitals across the nation over the price of prescription drugs has reached a boiling point. And Sam Quinn brings us up to date on the celebrations for Indianapolis's bicentennial, which are underway with plenty of opportunities for residents to safely engage. Again, you can read these stories in the latest print edition of IBJ or online at IBJ.com. I will say that it's quite a bit easier to access all of IBJ's award-winning business content if you have a subscription. It works out to about $2 per week, which is pretty good for the amount of information that can help you make important decisions here in the next few months. Just go to IBJ.com and click on the subscribe button. Thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ podcast, which is edited by Leslie Weidenbenner. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.